30 days ago, I was tired in a way I couldn't explain. Not the kind of tired where you didn't sleep enough. Not the kind of tired where you worked too hard. It was deeper than that, like my cells themselves had forgotten how to produce energy. I'd wake up after 8 hours of sleep and feel like I hadn't slept at all. I'd hit 2 o'clock in the afternoon and feel like someone had pulled a plug somewhere inside my body. Coffee helped for maybe 40 minutes. And then I was right back underwater. I was exercising too, and that's the part that really confused me. I was going hard. I was sweating. I was doing the things you're supposed to do. And yet I felt worse, not better, every single week. So I did what I always do when something isn't working. I went deep into the research. And what I found completely changed how I think about exercise, about energy, about metabolism, and honestly about the entire concept of fitness. It's called Zone 2 training. And I need to tell you everything about it because it might be the most misunderstood and underutilized tool in health and longevity that almost nobody is talking about in the right way. So stay with me here because this is going to get a little bit scientific, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what Zone 2 is, why it works at the cellular level, what happened to me over 30 days of doing it consistently, and exactly how you can start doing it yourself starting tomorrow. No expensive equipment, no special diet required. Just a completely different philosophy about what exercise is actually supposed to do for your body. Let me start with a question. When you think about a workout, what do you think a good one looks like? Most people. And I was absolutely in this category. Think a good workout is one where you're breathing hard, where you're sweating, where your heart is pounding, where it hurts a little. We've been conditioned to believe that intensity equals effectiveness. No pain, no gain. Hustle culture. Push yourself to the limit. And there is absolutely a place for high-intensity training. I'm not here to tell you that hard workouts are bad, but here's what nobody told me, and here's what the research is increasingly screaming. The foundation of almost every elite endurance athlete's training and the foundation of long-term metabolic health is not intense. It is deliberately, almost frustratingly easy, and it is doing something inside your mitochondria that no amount of hard training can replicate. Let me explain what Zone 2 actually is, because there's a lot of confusion about this. When exercise physiologists talk about training zones, they're referring to heart rate zones that correspond to different energy systems and metabolic states in your body. Zone 1 is essentially walking, very light activity. Zone 3, 4, and 5 are progressively more intense, up to all-out maximum effort sprinting. Zone 2 sits right in the middle of light and moderate, and it has a very specific definition. Zone 2 is the highest level of exercise intensity at which your body primarily uses fat as its fuel source and your lactate levels remain stable and low. In practical terms, it usually corresponds to about 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. And the way it feels, you should be able to hold a conversation, not easily. There should be a little effort in your breathing, but you should be able to speak in full sentences without gasping. The moment you start having to pause mid-sentence to catch your breath, you've probably tipped out of Zone 2 into Zone 3, and that transition matters enormously. Now here's where it gets fascinating, and this is the part that took me a while to really understand. The reason Zone 2 is so powerful has everything to do with mitochondria. You've heard of mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. As every biology teacher in human history has said, But let's talk about what that actually means in practice. Your mitochondria are the tiny organelles inside your cells that take fat and glucose and oxygen and convert them into ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the actual currency of energy that your body runs on. Everything you do, every thought you think, every muscle contraction, every heartbeat, all of it runs on ATP. And the quality and quantity of your mitochondria directly determines how much energy you have, how efficiently you run, and to a very significant degree, how healthy and how long you live. Here's what most people don't realize. The number of mitochondria you have is not fixed. It is trainable, and the stimulus that most powerfully drives the creation of new mitochondria, a process called mitochondrial biogenesis, is sustained aerobic exercise in exactly the intensity range of zone 2. When you stay in zone 2, you are essentially sending a very specific signal to your cells that says, we need more efficient energy production capacity, build more powerhouses. And over time, with consistent training, that's exactly what happens. Your cells literally create more mitochondria, and not only more of them, Zone 2 training also improves the efficiency of the mitochondria you already have, making them better at using fat as fuel. This is where we need to talk about metabolic flexibility, because I think this concept explains a lot of the chronic fatigue and energy crashes that so many people experience. Metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to smoothly switch between burning fat and burning carbohydrates depending on what's available and what the situation demands. A metabolically flexible person wakes up in the morning, hasn't eaten in 8 or 10 hours, and can happily run on fat stores for energy. They don't crash. They don't desperately need coffee or breakfast the second they open their eyes. They also, when they eat carbohydrates, process them efficiently and don't experience the dramatic spike and crash cycle that leaves you foggy and tired 2 hours after a meal. Metabolic flexibility is, in my view, one of the most important and most overlooked aspects of health, and chronic Zone 2 training is one of the most powerful ways to build it. When I dug into the research on this, one name kept coming up: Peter Attia. He's a physician who focuses on longevity medicine, and he has been one of the loudest voices explaining why Zone 2 training should form the foundation of any serious fitness and longevity protocol. He's spoken at length about work done by researchers like Iñigo Millán, a physiologist who has worked with professional cyclists, including Chris Froome, one of the most successful Tour de France riders ever. Millán's research has shown that elite endurance athletes spend an extraordinary amount of their training time, sometimes 80% or more, in Zone 2, not in the hard, suffering zones we romanticize, in this easy, conversational, almost boring pace. And when you look at their mitochondrial density under a microscope, it is dramatically higher than in sedentary or even recreationally active individuals. The implication is profound. The foundation of extraordinary aerobic capacity is not suffering. It is patience. It is consistency at a pace that feels too easy. So now I want to tell you what happened to me, because I know that data and physiology are compelling, but real-world experience is what actually makes you believe something enough to change your behavior. 30 days ago, I committed to doing Zone 2 training 5 days a week for 30 days. Each session was between 45 minutes and 1 hour. I chose cycling as my primary mode because it's low impact and easy to maintain a steady pace, but I also did some brisk walking outdoors on the days I didn't feel like getting on the bike. The critical thing was keeping my heart rate in the Zone 2 range the entire time, which for me Based on my age, and a rough calculation of my maximum heart rate was approximately 132 to 145 beats per minute. I used a simple heart rate monitor strapped to my chest, and I was almost embarrassed by how slow I had to go to stay in that range. This is something I want to address directly because it was genuinely humbling. The first few days, staying in zone 2 was harder than it sounds, not because it was physically hard, but because my ego was getting in the way. I kept wanting to push harder. The intensity felt insufficient. I kept thinking, this can't be doing anything, this is too easy. On the bike, I was going at a pace that felt like a warm-up. When I was walking at a pace where I could have been on the phone without anyone knowing I was exercising. And that felt wrong. Everything in my conditioning said that if I'm not suffering, I'm not progressing. But here's what happened around day 7. Something shifted. I woke up that morning and I noticed, I genuinely noticed it as a distinct sensation, that I felt clearer, not dramatically different, not some miraculous transformation. Just cleaner, less foggy. I didn't reach for coffee the second I woke up. I had a glass of water, I sat with my thoughts for 20 minutes, and I felt okay. That might sound like nothing if you're someone who already feels fine in the morning. But for me, that was unusual. That was different. By week 2, the afternoon energy crashes that had become almost clockwork in my life started to soften. I still felt a natural dip around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. That circadian rhythm, that's normal for humans, but it was no longer this catastrophic collapse where I felt like I couldn't function. It was more like a gentle tide going out rather than a cliff I was falling off. I was also sleeping better, falling asleep faster, waking up less frequently in the middle of the night. I'd read that zone 2 training can improve sleep quality, something about how it regulates cortisol rhythms and supports parasympathetic nervous system activity. And I was experiencing it firsthand. By week 3, something else happened that I wasn't fully expecting. My resting heart rate dropped noticeably. I'd been tracking it casually for a while, and it had been sitting in the high 60s. By day 20, it was consistently in the low 60s, and by day 25, it had dipped into the high 50s on several mornings. Resting heart rate is one of the cleaner indicators of cardiovascular fitness and parasympathetic nervous system tone, and watching it drop week over week was one of the most motivating things I've ever experienced in a health practice. It was the biological confirmation that something real was happening inside my body. Week 4 brought something I can only describe as a shift in baseline. My energy wasn't just less bad. It was actively good. I was waking up and feeling ready. I was going through long days without the desperate need for stimulants or sugar. My mood was more stable. My focus at work was noticeably sharper in the afternoons, which is traditionally when I'm the least productive. My partner mentioned that I seemed less irritable, which, honestly, was a little humbling to hear, but I'll take it. And the workouts themselves had started to feel meditative rather than like a chore. There's something genuinely calming about sustained, low-intensity movement. Your mind settles. You're not gasping. You're just moving through the world at a pace that feels almost natural, and there's time to think, to breathe, to just be in your body in a way that hard training doesn't allow. Now let me address the question I know is in your head right now, because it was absolutely in mine. If Zone 2 is so great, why doesn't everyone do it? Why isn't this the dominant form of exercise advice everywhere? Part of it is cultural. We live in a culture that rewards effort that looks like effort. A sweaty, breathless workout looks like something. A brisk 45-minute walk or a moderate bike ride looks like a nice afternoon. There's no drama in it. You don't collapse afterward. You don't post a dramatically filtered photo of your red face and full heart rate monitor. It doesn't have the aesthetic of transformation that we've all been sold. And fitness culture, frankly, the fitness industry makes a lot of money selling you intensity. High-intensity interval training classes, boot camps, programs that promise results in 20 minutes because that's more marketable than walk at a conversational pace for an hour 5 times a week. There's also a very real phenomenon that exercise physiologists call the gray zone, or junk miles problem. What happens with most recreational exercisers, and this was absolutely me, is that they do their moderate or hard workouts too hard to qualify as zone 2, but not hard enough to deliver the specific adaptations of truly high-intensity training. They live in zone 3, which is sometimes called the gray zone. It's uncomfortable enough to feel like work, but it doesn't trigger the powerful mitochondrial adaptations of zone 2, and it doesn't deliver the VO2 max improvements of zone 4 and 5 training. You get tired, you stress your body, you don't fully recover, and you don't get the metabolic benefits you're looking for. And so you keep pushing harder, getting more fatigued, and wondering why you feel so exhausted all the time. This was my entire exercise life for years. The polarized training model, which is what the research increasingly supports, suggests that the optimal training distribution for most people is roughly 80% zone 2 and 20% truly hard efforts in zone 4 or 5. Not gray zone, not moderate, hard or easy with very little in between. The zone 2 work builds your aerobic base, grows your mitochondria, and improves your fat burning efficiency. The high-intensity work builds VO2 max and neuromuscular capacity. Together, they produce something extraordinary. But the prerequisite for making the high-intensity work actually pay off is a big, well-developed aerobic base built through zone 2. Elite athletes understand this intuitively. Most recreational exercisers never learn it. Let me talk about the lactate piece for a moment, because it's important and it's often poorly explained. When you exercise above zone 2, your body starts producing lactate faster than it can clear it. Lactate isn't actually the villain it was once thought to be. It can be recycled as fuel. But when it accumulates faster than your mitochondria can process it, it signals that you've transitioned into a less efficient energy system. The lactate threshold, the point at which lactate starts accumulating significantly, is essentially the upper boundary of zone 2. Training in zone 2 improves your lactate clearance capacity over time, which means your zone 2 ceiling rises. Things that used to push you into zone 3 stay comfortably in zone 2. Your engine gets bigger. You can go faster at the same metabolic cost. For longevity purposes, this matters enormously. VO2 max, your maximum oxygen uptake, essentially the size of your aerobic engine, is one of the single strongest predictors of all cause mortality in the research literature. Being in the top quartile of VO2 max for your age is associated with dramatically lower risk of dying from cardiovascular disease, cancer, and virtually every other major cause of death compared to being in the bottom quartile. And the most effective long-term way to build VO2 max is not to constantly do hard intervals. It's to build a massive aerobic base through zone 2 and then use a modest amount of high-intensity work on top of that base to push your ceiling higher. I want to be really practical with you now about how to actually do this, because I think the gap between understanding an idea and implementing it is where most people get lost. First, figure out your zone 2 heart rate range. The simplest method is the 180 minus your age formula, which gives you a rough estimate of your zone 2 upper boundary. If you're 40 years old, that's 140 beats per minute. If you're 30, that's 150. This is a rough starting point, not a precise measurement. Things like fitness level, medications, and genetics affect it, but it'll get you in the ballpark. A better method is the talk test. You should be able to speak in complete sentences without pausing for breath, but you should definitely feel that you're working. If you can sing, you're too easy. If you're gasping, you're too hard. Right in the middle is where you want to be. Second, pick a mode of exercise that lets you sustain a steady pace for a long time without technical difficulty. Cycling, either outdoor or stationary, is excellent because you can precisely control your effort and it's low impact. Brisk walking, especially on flat ground or with light inclines, works very well and is accessible to almost everyone. Easy jogging or running works if you're fit enough to stay in zone 2 while running, though many people find they have to go embarrassingly slow to do this. Rowing and swimming also work well. The key is that you want sustained, rhythmic, aerobic movement, not anything that requires you to stop, start, or sprint. Third, get a heart rate monitor. You do not need an expensive one. A simple chest strap heart rate monitor that pairs with your phone is perfectly adequate. I personally find chest straps more accurate than wrist-based monitors, especially during lower intensity exercise where the wrist sensors can be less reliable. But a modern smartwatch will work reasonably well. The point is you need real-time heart rate feedback because your subjective sense of how hard you're working is surprisingly unreliable, especially when you're first learning what zone 2 feels like. Fourth, and this is the one that will most test your patience, go slower than you think you need to. When I first started, I was genuinely surprised by how slow I had to cycle to stay at 140 beats per minute. I was going at a pace that felt like I wasn't doing anything. My instinct screamed that this was a waste of time. But the whole point is to stay in that zone long enough for the metabolic adaptations to accumulate. Duration and consistency at the right intensity is the entire game. If you push too hard and drift into zone 3, you're no longer getting the zone 2 benefit. You're in the gray zone, so humble yourself, go slower than feels necessary, and trust the process. Fifth, think about duration and frequency. The research suggests that somewhere between 3 and 5 hours of zone 2 per week is a reasonable target for most people seeking metabolic health benefits. That's sessions of between 45 minutes and 90 minutes, done 4 or 5 days a week. If you're just starting, don't feel like you need to hit this immediately. Start with 3 30-minute sessions a week and build gradually. The body adapts, and you'll find you can sustain longer and longer sessions without it feeling burdensome. But please, at minimum, go for 45 minutes per session. The first 15 to 20 minutes of any aerobic exercise is partly your body transitioning into the right metabolic state. The real zone 2 benefits accumulate in the sustained effort after that. Sixth, be patient. I cannot say this enough. The mitochondrial adaptations from zone 2 training take weeks and months to manifest fully. In the first week or two, you might not feel much. You might actually feel like you're under training. The changes I described in my 30-day experiment, the better sleep, the clearer energy, the lower resting heart rate, started showing up around week 2 and accelerated into weeks 3 and 4. Other people see changes sooner, others later, depending on their baseline fitness and how far they've been from this kind of training. The research on mitochondrial biogenesis suggests that Meaningful structural changes in the mitochondria can happen in as little as 4 weeks of consistent training, but the full expression of those changes takes 3 to 6 months. Think of Zone 2 as a long game. You are building infrastructure. You are renovating your cellular energy production system from the inside. That is not a 1-week project. I also want to say something about combining Zone 2 with other training, because I don't want you to walk away thinking you should only ever do easy exercise. Zone 2 is the foundation, not the totality. If you're also doing resistance training, which you absolutely should be, especially for longevity, Zone 2 makes an excellent complement because it doesn't significantly impair recovery from strength work. The low intensity means you're not accumulating the kind of metabolic stress that interferes with muscle protein synthesis. So you can lift weights 2 or 3 days a week and do Zone 2 on other days without them fighting each other. What you want to be more careful about is doing very high intensity cardio on top of heavy lifting, because that combination can suppress recovery. But Zone 2 and strength training are almost perfect partners. And if you want to eventually incorporate some high-intensity cardio, VO2 max intervals, for example, which are short, hard efforts that push you to your cardiovascular ceiling, having a solid Zone 2 base makes those efforts dramatically more effective. Think of it this way: Zone 2 builds a bigger engine, VO2 max intervals push that engine's red line higher. You need both, but the engine has to come first. Let me talk briefly about nutrition and Zone 2, because I get questions about this whenever I discuss this topic. The relationship between what you eat and how Zone 2 training works is actually quite interesting. Zone 2 specifically trains your body to access and use fat as fuel. One of the key adaptations is that your muscles get better at using fatty acids as their primary energy source during moderate exercise. This is directly connected to metabolic flexibility. If your diet is very high in refined carbohydrates, and you rarely, if ever, put your body in a situation where it needs to burn fat, this metabolic machinery gets rusty. Zone 2 training is one of the best ways to retrain it. Some coaches and researchers suggest that doing Zone 2 sessions in a fasted state, perhaps first thing in the morning before eating, can enhance the fat adaptation signal because your glycogen stores are lower and your body is pushed more deeply toward fat oxidation. I experimented with this and found it personally effective, but it's not required. The most important thing is simply doing the sessions consistently. What I'd avoid is doing Zone 2 sessions right after a large, high carbohydrate meal, high insulin levels, which follow a carbohydrate-rich meal, suppress fat burning, which means your body preferentially uses glucose even when you're exercising at Zone 2 intensity. You'll still get some benefit, but you'll get more from training in a lower insulin state, either fasted or 2 to 3 hours after a balanced meal. I also want to address the elephant in the room. Is 45 minutes to an hour 5 times a week actually realistic for people with full lives and real-time constraints? I hear you. I've thought about this. My honest answer is that it depends on how you think about exercise time. I shifted my thinking from workout time to movement time, and it completely changed the equation. Zone 2 doesn't require you to drive to a gym, change clothes, do an elaborate warm-up, destroy yourself, and then recover for a day and a half. A Zone 2 session can be as simple as putting on your shoes and walking briskly for an hour while listening to a podcast or an audiobook. It can be cycling to and from work if you're in a position to do that. It can be a stationary bike in your living room while you watch something. The low intensity means you're not left shattered afterward. You can go back to your normal life feeling better, not worse, than before the session. When you reframe Zone 2, training as enhanced leisure time rather than punishing exercise, finding the hours for it becomes much more realistic. I want to close by zooming out and connecting this to something bigger, because I think Zone 2 training is more than just an exercise protocol. It is a philosophy about how we relate to our bodies and to time. We live in a world that is obsessed with acceleration and with shortcuts. We want the fastest results, the most dramatic transformation, the protocol that promises everything in the least amount of time. And there are domains of life where speed is genuinely valuable. But human biology is not always one of them. Our cells operate on their own time scale. Mitochondrial biogenesis, cardiovascular adaptation, metabolic flexibility. These things respond to accumulated, consistent, sustainable inputs over weeks and months. They cannot be hacked in a weekend. They cannot be unlocked with a 2-week challenge. They require the kind of patient, deliberate, long-horizon effort that our culture increasingly devalues. In some ways, Zone 2 training taught me as much about patience and long-term thinking as it did about physiology. Every session, I had to resist the urge to push harder than the protocol called for. Every week, I had to trust that the adaptation was happening, even when I couldn't yet feel it. Every month, I had to keep showing up for sessions that felt almost too easy to be meaningful. And then at the end of 30 days, I felt the evidence in my body in a way that no graph or research paper could have made as real as lived experience. My energy is better, my sleep is deeper, my resting heart rate is lower, my afternoon crashes are gone, my mood is more stable, and I have a relationship with low-intensity movement that feels genuinely sustainable in a way that no high-intensity program I've ever tried has felt. I'm not dreading the next session. I'm looking forward to it. Because it doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like care, like something I'm doing for my cells, for my mitochondria, for my future self who wants to have energy and capacity well into his later decades. If you've been exercising hard and feeling exhausted rather than energized, consider that you might be spending too much time in the gray zone and not enough time building your aerobic base. If you've been skipping exercise because you feel like you don't have time for a real workout, consider that a 45-minute walk at a brisk pace might be doing more for your long-term health than the 30-minute Ishite class you've been dreading. And if you've been struggling with chronic fatigue, brain fog, afternoon energy crashes, or poor sleep, consider that the problem might not be a lack of intensity. It might be a mitochondrial system that has been chronically undernourished by exactly the kind of training it most needs. Zone 2 changed my energy in 30 days. I believe it can change yours too. Start slow. Stay consistent. Trust the biology, and give it the time it actually needs to work. If you found this useful, please share it with someone who's been exhausted by the conventional fitness advice. Drop a comment below telling me where you're starting from and what your goals are. I read every single one. And if you want to go deeper on the science, I'll link some of the key sources and researchers I mentioned in the description below.